Just a quick message before we begin. If you've been thinking about joining the BAST Level 5 Singing Teacher Qualification this September 2024, then this is your reminder to get your applications in before the closing date in a couple of weeks on the 5th of August. And remember, if you have completed the 20-hour course with us before, then this is the last term that you can get all those fees deducted from the cost of the qualification. So to find out more, head over to basttraining.com. On with the podcast.
Ken Bozeman, you joined me for an episode of the podcast back in January of this year to talk about how to understand and apply vocal acoustic pedagogy. And you took us through some really great terminology, as well as an exploration of the chiaroscuro whisper. So now you're back 7 months later. So I can only assume I didn't put you off last time.
Oh no, it was delightful.
Well, you're here to talk about acoustic registration, and something you recently shared with me was a thought that the discussion of registration kind of needs to move in this direction, more towards the acoustic and the perceptual. So firstly, what is the difference between laryngeal registration and acoustic registration?
So laryngeal registration, which for many years we assumed was the only registration there was, we now know better, deals with how the vocal folds are shaped for pitch across the range and which part of the vocal fold is involved in oscillation, actually. So if the TA muscle is involved, we typically historically have called that chest voice, now mechanism 1. If it, as the vocal folds are stretched and thinned, it has to do with the thickness, the length, and the internal stiffness or tension of the vocal folds, plus which structures participate in the vibration. As they are stretched and thinned for higher pitch, it shifts from TA muscle to the vocal ligament. And when vocal ligament is bearing the tensile tension, basically, of vibration, we call that head voice, or mechanism 2. And interestingly, and this is very recent actually, I was with Ingo Tietze in Mexico in February a couple of times, and he has done some tests on kinds of tissue and what frequencies they can vibrate at. And at a certain point, the vocal ligament can't vibrate quick enough to qualify for a whistle register, but the epithelial tissue can. So he's postulating, I don't think he's written the article yet, so this is really new and it's all lingo, so he has to be credited, that whistle register is epithelial vibration. So we go from TA muscle to vocal ligament to epithelium for the laryngeal register vibratory mechanism that's going on. And pulse is just a funky kind of, TA vibration really low in the range, mechanism 0. Acoustic, and so those tend to be range specific and range limited, though you can, through various muscular manipulations, extend, like you can extend a chestier register higher or lower by changing your strategy enough. But if you just let it go where it would innately go, it tends to happen at a certain point. People often talk about E flat 4 is a big transition area between, TA muscle dominance to CT dominance, but we know that the basses, baritones, and tenors stay in a lighter version of mechanism 1 all the way up, typically, unless they deliberately want to go into a heady sound. Acoustic registers have entirely to do with the relationship of the pitch you're singing and the potential harmonics of that pitch and the lowest resonance of the vowel that you're singing. So if I'm singing this pitch and I have this set of potential harmonics, the harmonic series above that fundamental frequency, and I'm singing a vowel that has this resonance, where the relationship between those two will determine the acoustic register. And very simply put, how many harmonics are at and or below that first resonance. So if you're singing the same pitch as that first resonance, you're in whoop timbre, which the Italians basically, it was equivalent to their voce piena di testa, full voice in head. And that's what classical treble voices sing a lot in whoop timbre, particularly from the top half of the treble clef on up. It's very round and domey and smooth and full and opulent sounding. No, very little buzz, very smooth, round. There's then this whole octave between whoop timbre that is called close timbre. It's only whoop timbre when that matches. When that drops below, when you're singing with somewhere in the octave below the first resonance, you're in close timbre or voce chiusa, and that's kind of a sizzly timbre. And I believe it's pretty much the equivalent to what is often referred to as mix. Mix is that. And it has a kind of a sizzle to it. It has some buzz, but it's a more refined buzz than the coarse buzz of open timbre. Once your second harmonic drops below the first resonance, now you're singing a pitch that's an octave or more below the lowest resonance of your vowel that you're singing. That's open timbre. And all of these others are just increasingly open. And each one of those will open the timbre more and make it even buzzier. And if you're going in this direction, if you're ascending, each time a potential harmonic rises through that lowest resonance, there is what I call a mini closure, a small closure, until you get to the big closure. When you go from open to close timbre, that's the big open close closure phenomenon. But every one of those is a level of open within open timbre, a level of closure within open timbre. So those are the acoustic registers vary per vowel. Why is that? First resonances vary per vowel by as much as an octave. So you have those first resonances moving. So on the same pitch on different vowels, you could be in a different acoustic register.
Could you give us that example again using a particular vowel so we would kind of be able to follow where the acoustic registration is for, say, an E vowel?
So an E vowel's first resonance is at the bottom of the treble clef, a little bit higher or lower depending on the voice type. So if in an E vowel, you would arrive in whoop timbre at the bottom of the treble clef, assuming you don't change the shape of the E. And how do you move those resonances around? Well, you can raise that lowest resonance roughly by two means. Opening the mouth more will raise it. Lowering the tongue dorsum will raise it. So if I keep the tongue dorsum high to sound like an E, that would be whoop timbre on the top note. And if I want to track whoop higher, I would open my mouth but keep my tongue dorsum high. If I lower my tongue dorsum, it will choose a different spectral tone color and that won't be an E anymore.
Right.
I have to keep the tongue dorsum high for it to sound like an E to select the harmonic that sounds like an E. Spectral tone color for me and Howell's work. So whoop timbre for an E is from there on up. Now, what if I don't want to be in whoop timbre? Like if I'm a non-treble singer and I don't want to have a robust, viral, so-called virile ah, and then a countertenor E. Don't attack me for. I'm just using terms that have been in the history. I'm not implying any issues there. Okay. I would raise the first resonance of the E vowel to avoid whoop timbre, to keep it ahead of the pitch I'm singing, rather than going E. I would raise the resonance by opening my mouth. So you got a lot of options that you can play with. Now, so for an ah, my first resonance for an ah is higher than I can sing. F5, okay, at the top of the treble clef. However, that means my main closure for the ah would happen at F4, and there would be a mini closure at B flat 3, a fifth lower, and another one at F3. Why? So my main one is at F4, a fifth lower, because that's, octave, fifth, and so forth. A fifth lower at B flat 3, there's going to be a little mini closure, and all the way down at F3, I'm 2 octaves below the resonance, so my fourth harmonic is interacting with the resonance there. An octave and a fifth below, my third harmonic is interacting with that resonance. An octave below my second harmonic, where the main closure happens, is interacting with that resonance. If I could sing a high F5, a countertenor can, I'd be in whoop timbre. So the acoustic registers have utterly to do with where the harmonics are relative to that lowest resonance, and it varies from vowel to vowel. And training all of those mini closures on each vowel is a very good strategy in training freedom of range, because our instinct is to track. Once we hit a nice harmonic resonance match, our body likes that. Oh, that's strong. Let's just keep that. And so we go into yell mode.
Yeah.
You know, once we hit that, we go, oh, I'll just open and just track the you know, but that tends to invite more constriction and stronger glottal resistance, which makes it harder on the voice.
And so can we talk about this idea of turning over, which I understand to mean like a transitional or a passaggio event? So what's the difference between the laryngeal passaggio and the acoustic passaggio?
So turning over is, in my opinion, a description, a procedural, subjective description of an acoustic sensation. Why it feels like turning over, I have no idea, because that's just human perception. We feel this, you know, sensation happening, but it's acoustic. There's no shape change in the vocal tract, but allowing that to happen prevents us from just simply powering, increasing pressure to get the pitch to go up. It gives a more favorable, beneficial feedback to the larynx so that I can stay in a somewhat thicker vocal fold arrangement. I can stay in mechanism 1 as a former tenor. I don't have to flip into whoop or into to mechanism 2, but it lightens it, and it gives enough feedback that it doesn't require stronger glottal resistance. So the larynx is benefited by allowing that acoustic shift rather than proceeding to yell, which would mean the larynx is going to have to start increasing the glottal resistance because it's not getting any help from above. I probably mentioned this last time. Why bother with acoustic pedagogy? Because beneficial acoustic feedback reduces the transglottal pressure difference so that the vibrator isn't fighting the acoustics. The acoustics are actually aiding the vibrator rather than either fighting it or not giving it any help at all. And letting these transitions occur gives better beneficial feedback to the vibrator so that it can function without having to increase resistance, glottal resistance, transglottal resistance. We used to just say, use less breath pressure. Well, it's more accurate to say, keep your transglottal pressure difference smaller, because high loud sounds require stronger breath pressure levels. But if you can increase the pressure, the effective back pressure acoustically in the vocal tract, you can keep the pressure difference narrow, and your vocal folds only have to manage the difference in the pressure. Right. Only if you go straight from high pressure to atmospheric pressure right across the vocal folds, then they're purely just managing the amount of breath pressure that your lungs are producing or your respiratory system. But if you can create back pressure with clever acoustics, you can reduce the difference, and the vocal folds can't tell the difference. Okay. You know, between that and the same transglottal pressure difference at a soft sound and a loud sound, it feels the same, equally easy in the neck. But when that transglottal pressure difference gets too strong, we start recruiting other closure forces to help stabilize and you know, achieve closure, and then we got trouble.
So in the studio scenario, if you wanted to help a singer to manage that transglottal pressure, instead of saying, hey singer, can you please manage your transglottal pressure? Right. What would your approach be? What exercise or what thing would you give them to do?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of things. First of all, you can exercise the laryngeal behavior somewhat independently with certain strategies, but that's not an answer to your question, because I would use acoustic strategies as well. But let's start there. If you use nasalence,
Mm.
If you open the velar port, that broadens it actually is using acoustics in a way, is eliminating acoustics in a way. It broadens the bandwidth of the first resonance. A broader bandwidth to a resonance allows more frequencies through, but it reduces the intensity of the resonance, which reduces its interference. So if you use a nasal, you can play with the laryngeal function more independently. It's not entirely independent, never is, but more independently. So for example, if I used my toddler complaint, which is slightly nasal, or I know a lot of SLS trained people use syllables like num 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 num. They're using a neutral vowel for starters, and they're using num 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 two nasal consonants, both of which reduce interference and allow you to play with migrating the auditory roughness across range. So num 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 is a little buzzier in the mouth. Num 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 num. That's the mosquito in the head. Num 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 num. And you can choose your own insects in between that migration. I don't know what they would be, but maybe a cicada would be in there somewhere. A cricket. I don't know. But anyway, it gets more refined. It gets more fine granular from buzzier to just a tiny little mosquito-like thing, and the location of it shifts from oral to in the head, all the while your neck is staying released. You're not climbing your neck up into your head, right? So nasals will do that. Notice also, though, the vowel will migrate as well. The sensation location vibrates. I call that now. My fancy term for that is locational somatosense.
Okay.
I haven't run across that from anyone else. I'm sure we all have our term. And honestly, to be honest about it, that's basically an update of the old placement word, which has got a lot of bad baggage. You can't actually place sound, but you do feel it moving around. So, it's not all bad. Anyway, so locational somatosense, where you feel this thing, right? So not only does that migrate, the vowel migrates, the auditory roughness migrates. So I use, rather than talking about formants and harmonics or anything like that, I use auditory targets, in particular, the two vowel tone colors that you're playing with any vowel, and buzziness migration from coarse to smooth, and locational somatosense, or where you feel it. We don't have to use the fancy term in a lesson. Where you feel you're saying, you're going to feel it kind of move more inside and kind of go up and down at the same time. The buzziness may feel like it goes up in your head, but you feel like it's staying relaxed in a downward direction, hence that underbelly feeling. So those are the kinds of terms I use in a lesson. I would say, okay, for your ah, as you go up, leave an ah shape. Forget about ah as the target. Imagine through that ah shape, ya, and then come back to ah on the bottom. Ah. Now the trick for the singer is to not shape change, because they will want to reshape to form the speech level shape of an I say, no, it'll do itself. Leave the shape, deliberately leave the shape where you started under that ah. Ah. In fact, forget about language and just do some expression, some inflective expression. Start with the language sound, ah, and then forget about it. Ah, and go into, what are you talking about? Ah, or what? Ah. Everything migrated. The vowel migrated. It went from buzzier to smoother. The sensation of where it was migrated. So that's what I do with every vowel. And in particular, if I'm doing classical, I will do this. But I could do this with other styles too. I will actually have them experience all of these little transitions, because at each of those transitions, those migrations will be stronger. And you can hear them and feel them. And the singer goes, oh yeah. And I didn't go e. It's doing those migrations. If I change the language, I think I said this last time. Language is the problem, expression is the solution.
Yeah.
Because if I go e and I chase the target sound, trying to not let it migrate, it does migrate anyway, but it just migrates in a less effective way.
Yeah. And just to be clear, that would be what an acoustic transition is. So there's the pure vowel, if you like, in bunny ears, and then in order for the pitch to ascend or to not crack or
begin to create trouble,
or begin to create trouble, we have to migrate the vowel a little bit, and that's the acoustic passaggio
yes,
that we're hearing there.
yes. Well, it's acoustic phenomenon. I don't know that that's an interesting, I should think about that. I don't know that I've ever referred to it straight up as acoustic passaggio. I have talked about acoustic registers, and they are transitions. So I've used acoustic transitions, register transitions. I suppose passaggio is a fair term for acoustic register transitions. But usually when we think about passaggio, we think about a particular area of the range. Richard Miller wrote about the primo passaggio, the secondo passaggio, and the zona di passaggio, between those two, which is the primary. He was talking about that primary transition in non-treble voices, bass, baritones, and tenors, between open timbre and closed timbre. Well, treble voices have the same one in the same pitches. It's the bottom is between the clefs. It's between the bass clef and the treble clef. That's where all that happens. But treble voices also have a higher one, an octave higher, and that was purely acoustic. It's not really a laryngeal register change. It's pretty acoustic, going from closed timbre to whoop timbre, way up there. Because treble voices tend to transition into laryngeal mechanism 2 somewhere near the bottom of the treble clef. If they're doing CCM styles, they might extend that chest mix or a head mix up to maybe B4, maybe C5, but they're and some claim that they can extend that way higher. Most leave it behind by that point. But if they can keep a little bit of sizzle in the sound, which you can get with really good glottal closure, even in mechanism 2, it will have a little bit of sizzle to be a belt mix way high.
Yeah, and can you tell us a little bit more about style? So what sort of things are we working on acoustically in registers when we're looking at classical versus something non-classical, CCM, musical theatre?
So classical, historic classical, referred to variously as bel canto style, opera, art song style, tends to prioritize a chiaroscuro balanced timbre, which is a timbre that both has brilliance and depth or warmth. And you don't want either of those to obliterate the other. You want both of them to be there. And in a sense, as the sort of default mode, we can use some variety within that, but as your default mode is chiaroscuro timbre balance. And chiaroscuro, we usually call it as bright dark. It's literally clear dark, but clarity and brightness and focus are all accomplished by the same acoustic phenomenon, high spectral content. So they're kind of interchangeable. Though it's possible to be bright and not focused, generally the high frequency content creates some low, warm, dark, oscuro. I've kind of gotten off your question here, but we want that timbre balance. So we do things to keep that in balance up and down the range, and it does vary across the range. High chiaroscuro timbre is very much that full whoop timbre, which is very smooth. The fact that it's high gives some clarity and brightness to it. The fact that it's smooth keeps it warm and round sounding. Low would go very dull if we don't have a lot of high frequency ring in it. So we want to really keep a lot of buzziness in our low sounds. Low will almost automatically have darkness to it. So anyway, that's what we do in classical. Well, in CCM styles, at least a lot of them, there is this desire to keep the entire range as speech-like as possible. Now, realizing that that's going to involve some compromises because you can't keep, let me say this, because of absolute spectral tone color, each frequency has a frequency-dependent tone color. When you're singing a different frequency set, meaning a different pitch, you got a different paint set. You can't mix exactly the same color with a different paint set. It's amazing how well you can do it, in spite of the fact that every pitch has a different paint set that you're manipulating, that you're featuring. But you just reblend the colors and you still come up with something that people will accept as the right vowel. But there's really, the concept of a pure vowel is a perceptual conundrum. It's an illusion. It's a useful illusion. It's an illusion worth shooting for, as long as your mind realizes it's not really possible. It's not really true. But as long as we believe it, it sounds good. And pure vowels basically just says vowels that sound good. That's basically what it is. It isn't vowels that sound exactly the same, which is impossible across range. But they sound enough the same that we think they sound the same, and they sound good, so we call them pure. Okay. Distorted is a vowel that sounds kind of weirdly not right, right? Well, mostly we don't want that, although some genres will use some of that as part of their aesthetic play, right? Which is fine, as long as it works and is healthy, it's fine. But in classical, we don't distort the vowels much at all. Anyway, to keep it more speech-like for CCM styles, you do want to keep a little bit buzzy or a little bit higher. So you use more of a mixy, chesty, mixy sound higher. You extend open timbre a bit higher. And those are all pronunciation choices and a little bit tube choices, like you can shorten the tube length a little bit. You can raise your larynx a little bit and still have a healthy flow phonation. Usually extremes make it harder to do that. We're having a rainstorm in case you hear rain in the background. So you would probably prioritize the target vowel timbre more higher in the mix, whereas classical would allow in more complementary vowel tone color without, in other words, they're not going to move the resonance. If you don't move the resonance, the complementary tone color comes in more and sooner. So that comes in sooner than if I would open my mouth and try to extend the tone, the percentage of tone color in the vowel mix higher. In both cases, you still eventually, to stay comfortable, need to go through some acoustic register transitions. You'd probably cheat them a little bit higher by shortening the tube, by pronunciation. And the pronunciation choices is, when I do the chiaroscuro whisper, I do what I consider to be a reasonable classical set. Which is basically, it's really this. Basically that. I could choose a different one. And it's just a matter of pronunciation. As long as I can do it comfortably in my neck, it would be safe to use. So for example, and I've played with some for CCM recently, I've got two options. One would be to do, instead of this G major, I could do an E major. I'm not great at this because I don't do a lot of these, but as opposed to it's kind of an not an I don't like that a lot, but some people do. Or I could do an A flat minor. That to me gets closer to an timbre but it's not the and it's largely tongue positioning. But I get at it primarily from the auditory target and expression and neck comfort. Those are my goals. What is the pitch? What did I say, pitch? Pitch. I realized the ah isn't going to be an ah, 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 ah. Once I get that, I can open my mouth more and try to keep matching the same pitch and the same neck comfort. And if I do that, it's probably going to work okay for a position for a vowel choice. So you might have slightly different auditory targets to get a different aesthetic output for the, and I'll tend to use the hell yeah, damn right affect for a lot of those that encourages close timbre, which makes it easier in the neck. Because if I lose close timbre, the sound's going to be in my mouth, and that's going to hurt in my neck. It's going to be like a raw yell. But if I have that, I can get the brighter sound with neck comfort in close timbre, where some of that sensation is above my palate instead of all of it being in my mouth and neck.
And can we talk about sensation a little bit? Because before we came on to record, we were talking about procedural knowledge and kind of sensations. And you mentioned there about your posh new phrase that you're going to be using. So can you explain the kind of what singers tend to feel? Not that we want to prescribe necessarily, but what singers have described feeling in themselves when they're using acoustic registers or certain vowel modifications and things like that.
What was my posh phrase?
It was instead of placement, it was
that got yes. So locational somatosense.
yes.
Somatosense is your proprioception of what your body's feeling, right? And locational is where your body's feeling something, right? Locational, which is the fancy word for placement, because we know you can't actually place sound, but you do feel sound. Your body senses sound in different places. Not that you put it there, that's just where you feel it when you're doing certain things, right? So it sort of seems like you're putting it there, right? Yeah. So open timbre in acoustic terms is more oral. You feel it in the mouth, kind of in the, ideally I would say, because if you're doing what I also recommend, which is you're fronting the dark and putting the bright in the back, the opposite of our instinct. If you put bright in the front, you're going to get a reachy constricted sound. E. If you put that bright E in the back, E, using expression, E, you get a relaxed neck. That's the one we want. We don't want to feel effort in the neck. Basically, inefficiency is primarily felt as effort in the neck, right? Where the larynx is housed, right? E, A, A. So when you go into close timbre, that oral, middle of the oral buzzy sensation, part of it shifts to above the palate, and it kind of feels like it's rolling over, up and over. It's more internal. It internalizes more, so it moves a little bit more inside, whereas open timbre feels oral and exposed, like it could just buzz right on out your mouth. E, E, buzzing in my mouth and just coming right on out. E, 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 E. Now you have to put up with my old voice demonstrations. They're not ideal, but that is rolling over into closed position. It's getting too dull because I have asthenic waisted vocal folds. Old man voice. But E, it internalizes more, rolls over. E, you can find the color and it shifts to having more undervowel tone color. E, so E, E, E. And my neck, if I'm doing it well, feels like it can just kind of roll under with ease. E, E. It does not get hollower feeling. That's a somatosense as well, like a yawn. E, E. Bright to the front, raises the larynx and constricts the pharynx. Dark to the back, backs the tongue into the pharynx and depresses the larynx. E. I don't use either of those. I want bright in back, warm to the front. E, E. I'm putting that E to the front instead of E, E. Anyway, those are, and it also feels short front to back. I should have mentioned that one. If I do long front to back, I'm either yawning, or maybe E, E, E. It's short front to back, ringing in the back, warm to the front. Then I get a really balanced resonance. And I can use it for any style. I can just play with how bright to make it per genre. E. I can really go E, E if I want a, harder pop sound. E. Or if I want to warm it, use empathy. E, E. The emotion will color the sound. And under affective motivations, falls attitude. Attitude, is it an emotion or is it an attitude? I don't know. They all kind of overlap. Personality, and even caricature, like a cartoon caricature. If it's uninhibited and spontaneous, you can use, like I use old man voice. Yeah, oh yeah, sure. I'm fronting the dark, dull old man voice into my mask. Yeah, That's a lot of undervowel color. Yeah, is reachy. Yeah, actually going from speech to old man voice will teach you exactly what the major turnover feels like. It's an exaggerated training wheels training device.
I'm just pressing the pause button on the podcast for a very brief moment to invite you to book your free BAST call. If you've been thinking about joining the BAST community through one of our courses, but you just don't know which option is the best for you, then why not book your free Zoom chat with our very own Kimberly George, who has all the answers. Head over to basttraining.com/book-a-call/ and click that big blue button. That's basttraining.com/book-a-call/. Now, where were we?
And we mentioned again the word turning over. So there's a thing there about the terminology we might be coming across when we look at acoustic registration as well as acoustics in general. And what else can you tell us about that? What language might we see?
So let me review that. I think I did this before. I remember there's procedural knowledge and there's declarative knowledge. Declarative knowledge is just the facts, ma'am. Just tell me what's objectively going on. But we don't sing with that. We sing with procedural knowledge, which is what it feels like to do the thing. And procedural knowledge is utterly sensorial and therefore subjective. And that's not a bad word. Subjective is not a bad word. And it's way more reliable than people like to think it is. Oh, that's too subjective. Obviously, voice teachers, as like scientists, are looking for repeatable, reliably repeatable knowledge, right? We don't want something that's just going to be all over the map and I can't use it because it's not going to be the same for everybody. I've got to use something that will work more or less with a little adjustment for everybody. I'm here to suggest that procedural knowledge, even though it is utterly subjective, is reliably repeatable. And we need to stop dissing subjectivity as if it's not helpful. We use that word, we use anecdotal as a dirty word. Oh, that's just anecdotal. Well, everything is anecdotal. Everything's a case study. But if you find patterns that repeat over and over and over again, I wonder how they came up with the term head voice and chest voice. Well, a hell of a lot of people felt stuff in their head when they were doing that thing, and they felt, excuse my French, and they felt a lot of stuff in their chest when they were doing that other thing. So they say, oh, well, we'll just call this head voice and that chest voice. Duh. It's very reliable. Now, it wasn't very specific. That's why you need a coach and a teacher, and but even though it's subjective, these things I'm describing, they're very reliable and repeatable. Once a person feels it, oh yeah, it does kind of feel like that, and you can always ask them, what does it feel like to you? And you can use the students' subjective perceptions as well, but you will find patterns emerge that are pretty predictable and common over time. When a treble voice sings up to the top of the staff, and she says, it would typically be a she, although there are some countertenors that can sing that high these days, up to soprano high C. They say it left my body. Well, there's science for that, actually. We now know that vibrotactile sensation disappears at C5, C6, and it starts disappearing above the treble clef till it disappears entirely. But for years, that was just a subjective description of something that's actually declarative. So declarative can inform, when I'm doing this business here, because I know the intervals of the harmonic series and I know where resonances are, informants are, that's declarative knowledge that's informing where I'm likely to feel the thing that I have to feel. So it's informing my procedural knowledge, but it's not telling me what it's going to feel like.
Yeah.
My subjective perception is telling me what it's going to feel like, and that's what I sing with. I sing with what it feels like. I anticipate and intend those sensations to get it to happen.
And what would you say to the singer who says they don't feel anything? So maybe they need a little bit of guidance or a little bit of self-awareness of certain things, but to the singer who isn't new to the singing but just doesn't feel anything, what might that mean?
I haven't, well, first of all, no, I've never had a singer tell me that, just to be honest. Okay. But if one did, it's not out of the realm of possibility that someone might just not be that sensitive to sensations. They might be less sensitive than someone else. I think a lot of mindfulness exercising is trying to heighten one's proprioception and awareness of interoception, the stuff you feel on the inside. So going through some training exercises and then having conversations with them might help their mind attend to it. Well, for example, when I first did counterscotal whispering, and I do, and I ask people, did you hear? A percentage of people say, no, I didn't hear that. Why? It's the way the brain is attending to the sound. And the way the brain attends to sensation may be similarly need focusing. So I focus their attention on it by doing and what about the lower one? So now they're hearing this one, but they're not hearing the lower one. So I can coach with a little bit of play. I can get their brain to start attending to the thing I want them to attend to, and now they can hear it. Now they can hear the duet. They weren't hearing that as a duet when we started. I mean, Wolfgang Zaus has a wonderful YouTube thing where he teaches people to hear harmonics in a speech string that you don't hear until he runs you through a little protocol to get your brain to start listening differently. You've seen optical illusions where you look at a piece of paper and one person sees trees and another person sees faces, and you can get your brain eventually to see it either way. It's how your brain is programmed or habitually to attend to something. And with a little bit of play and work, you can often get it to attend to the phenomenon in a different way.
It's a bit like hearing overtones singing as well, if
Yes,
you can tune
exactly.
into that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think sensations might be similar to that you can attend to your body in ways, oh yeah, okay, oh yeah, I do kind of feel that this thing happening a bit, and I hear the vowel shifting, and so that's why we will always have a job, because we can help them hear things and feel things they weren't noticing before and improve their ability to notice it in helpful ways so that they can then use that intentionally as an intention, an output intention to guide the behavior. So I sometimes say that a voice teacher's job is to create circumstances in which fortunate accidents occur. And then you try to get those accidents to repeat often enough that they're no longer accidental.
Oh, lovely.
They're now I can do them.
Yeah.
Like the first time you ride, you don't fall over trying to ride a bike, it's an accident. Okay. But if you do it often enough, you get used to the feel and how you're managing the feel, and now you can ride the bike.
Yeah.
Very similar, any motor behaviors like that.
So we're going to add words of subjective and
Procedural,
procedural, all to our terminology all round. So we've also talked about covering the voice. We've got turning
Yep.
over. Can you describe those for us and
Sure.
what others we might have?
Well, so the turning over we've been talking about, there's this acoustic sensation of a rolling, somewhere up in there and a settling under that's turning over. Covering is because close timbre, open timbre feels very exposed right at the mouth. Close timbre feels like it's a little bit inside, a little bit less exposed. If you use less exposed, what we don't want is we don't want it to sound muffled, right? We don't want it to sound swallowed or muffled. So the word cover is avoided by a lot of people because it has some bad baggage. They don't want the student to think, oh, I've got to, especially if they're thinking dark in the back, I'm going to kind of mute and muffle and swallow my sound. And there's good cover and there's bad cover. Well, that's a bad cover. Anything and any term we use can either be done well or not so well. And so we're always having to manage and coach. But anyway, I mean, Pavarotti used the term cover, and I think he did okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's all right, that fella.
Yeah.
We'll give him a pass.
So it's not the problem with the terminology, it's a problem in how the student understands and applies it. And so I have no problem with people not wanting to use the term. I don't use the term really. I use the term turning over just to avoid the possible misunderstanding of the term cover. But I'm not going to go, well, he's no longer with us, but I would never try to convince Pavarotti, you shouldn't use that word. He also used the word close. I love that. Pavarotti said in one of his interviews, he talking about his father, and he always closed in the passaggio, and I want all the young tenors to close in the passaggio. He's talking about going from open to closed timbre. What is that? Does he want them to close their throats? No. He's talking about an acoustic sensation. There may well be some beneficial narrowing that's going on that's helping the acoustics, but you don't feel constriction, but you feel concentration of the sound, I would argue, in the oropharynx. Rather than hollowing in the oropharynx, you feel, good, very put together. Doesn't feel constricted, it feels pleasurably concentrated acoustically. That's closing. That is a procedural term. It is a description of a sensation, an acoustic sensation. It's not declarative. You're not actually closing something. It's a sensation.
I think that's what I like about what Ingo Tietze and Karen Tietze-Cox talk about in their book on SOVTs, about how if you move from a kind of expansive airway or a widening, you can then find the narrowings through musculature or articulation positions.
Yep.
But without this sense of squeeze or closing, as you're describing there.
Right. I mean, the tongue is constantly creating perturbations along the tube, and a perturbation is a local narrowing or widening. It's a change. Usually we think of the narrowing, and if you do that in the right place, you get really good beneficial feedback, and all of a sudden it's easier at the laryngeal level to do the thing. So those are, the terminology is endless about registration, as we know, but I like to hang with the historic successful terminology when I can. So I just translated voce chiusa, voce aperta. Because what do they mean by that? Why do they want to use the word close? Oh, there is this sort of concentration sensation. What about open? Yep. When you get below there, it feels more exposed and just open. And aperta not only means open, it also means apparent, direct, and oscuro, which is involved in the closure, also means, the English cognate is obscure, mysterious. It's more internal, a little bit more hidden, right? E-A, whereas E-A. So those terms, they're all procedural descriptions of sensations. They're all descriptions of subjective sensations. And they can be useful if managed well by a knowledgeable coach or teacher.
At BAS training, we encourage teachers to take a history, perhaps work through a vocal assessment when we first start working with a singer. As part of that, do you think we should be measuring singers' formant frequencies, or is it enough to understand the general soundscape of these?
Well, I don't. I never have with a student, but I can tell you exactly where mine are. And the only reason I can, and I was a little bit surprised because they're not exactly where I've charted them, using the Coda whisper. Because when you input a noise contains theoretically every frequency. Like white noise white light has every frequency of light. White noise has every frequency of sound within at least a certain span of frequencies. So if you have a broad enough band of noise frequencies that's low enough to high enough, it will completely populate the hills and valleys of your frequency hills and valleys of your resonances. And it will play them for you on the outside. So when I do, I know exactly where the second formant is, pitch-wise, and I can know where the first one is. It's, the second ones are right where I thought they were. The first ones are lower than I thought they were. And I thought, oh, why is that? And I thought, is it because I'm whispering, that the glottis isn't completely closed? Well, no, like when I close my glottis and thump, I get the same pitches. So now I would revise. I don't revise the charts because the charts chart where things are going to turn over. They're accurate. In my experience, they're accurate. But it's probable that as a frequency gets above the first resonance, it has to get enough above it for the turning phenomenon to be completed. I've always noticed that from about a minor third up to the turning pitch, you start hearing it's turning, and then it completes the turn in a kind of a decisive moment where I've charted it. Well, I suspect because my formants end up being about a minor third where I thought they were. So it's sort of like it isn't precisely when that harmonic rises above it, it's when it gets far enough above it to complete the whatever acoustic shift is going between spectral input. Anyway, but you can know exactly where they are with Coda whisper. Now, you have to learn how to do it because the instinctive whisper is mouthy and spread. That's not very helpful. Use ingressive. Use internalizing, almost like you're not articulating, like you're not doing anything about it. Those were all inhalatory. That keeps my neck from going. Those are slightly inhalatory glottal clicks. So if you wanted to, you could do that. But I've charted them all, and really, first formant locations don't move a lot from voice type to voice type. They do a little bit. So if you know what kind of voice type you're dealing with, the charts I've given you will tell you close enough, and close enough turns out to be good enough.
Good enough. And where do we find that, Ken? Where can we find your charted formant resonance?
Well, kenbozeman.com is the easiest one to remember. And there's a pedagogic resources link or on the menu, and there's just downloadable stuff, a bunch of downloadable stuff. It's not a monetized website, okay? There is a place if you want to go see where my books are. You can see where you can order my books and buy my books. I don't sell them, but it just gives you publisher information. But everything else on there is just free downloadable stuff. And on the homepage of the kenbozeman.com is my Lawrence University, where I'm retired, website. And it's too long to remember, so I don't tell people that one usually. but it's right on the home page, and that one has a bunch of recordings, not only of my singing when I sang, so that you can see what is this, did this guy know what he was doing? You can decide. You can go listen to me sing and decide whether I was any good or not. And then below that, which is more important, are lectures that I've given, including our previous interview. I ask if I can have permission to put the link to my interviews, and when organizations are done using it or give me permission, then I post those for free for people to listen to, various presentations, because sharing the information is kind of what it's about.
Absolutely. And our very own Kaya Hostekani talks about measuring these form and frequencies through vocal fry on something like Voce Vista or a spectrogram. Is that also a great way to kind of figure out?
Right. Vocal fry was Donald Miller's way of charting where they are, and that's a good way. I tend to think the chiaroscuro whisper is better, but both are good. One of the reasons I developed the chiaroscuro whisper was because of my vocal fold wasting from aging. I couldn't do a good vocal fry. On a good day, I can do one, but it was hard for me to do one when your vocal folds waste and you get a little bit of bowing. You can't do a good vocal fry. So I had to develop another reason. But I actually like it better for this reason. Vocal fry actually is a pitch. So it's going to have some frequency skips. Now it's so low that it almost doesn't matter. So your frequencies are going to be so close together that they will pretty much populate all of your resonances. A noise is actually, if you do one that has enough low frequency content, which is why I call it the chiaro oscuro whisper, because the typical whisper is the chiaro whisper. It's all bright, high frequency. I have to have low frequency content, but if I have it, I have every frequency. So it's going to completely paint in the entire resonance structure of my vocal tract, very precisely. But if you can do a good glottal fry, that's also another good way of doing it. It's not anything wrong with that, and Donald Miller made that very famous, and rightly so. The only other question I have about either of them is, you want the way that you're generating the noise to be the least disruptive of the way you would normally shape a vowel. So you want to make sure that neither your fry nor your whisper is too different, even at the larynx, than the subsequent phonation. So if I do a e, I don't think I'm doing anything different. That possibly could be also true with the glottal fry. I simply am not the best one to test that, because I would have to work to create a glottal fry, given my. So you want it to be as close to the song position as possible for the most direct transfer of sensation and shape.
Great. So overall, considering what we've discussed then, Ken, how would you kind of sum everything up into why we might, as teachers, want to be considering acoustic registration a little bit more, or maybe on par with laryngeal registration?
You fix laryngeal registration via acoustic registration. You can't really micromanage the muscles. Motor learning tells us that external targets are a better way to organize sophisticated motor activity than trying to manage the parts or managing the process. Your external target helps organize that, and you're primarily doing it via expression. That's your major tool. E, A, Y, expression. We're programmed to play this thing to express. E, A, and then we've learned language targets on top of that, and I can learn declaratively how language targets necessarily have to migrate across range. And then I can begin to, what would I feel like if I thought that, instead of thinking E, if I thought E, and I let it act, in that case, actively modify, and I learn those feels, what it feels like to do that when I first try it. I might do it a little awkwardly, but at least, and I am using some physiologic. I'm saying, oh, I'm going to open my mouth more. Okay. I'm going to keep my tongue dorsum high in the back. E. And I can use tricks, like linguistic tricks. I can use a g, 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 g. Why? Because it takes my tongue dorsum all the way to the palate. And if I'm lowering it too far, gay, 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 gee, 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 or I could use J glides, yee, 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 takes my tongue. So I can use everything at my disposal to get the shape ballpark close. But ultimately, when I'm doing expressive singing, I'm using expression and learned linguistic patterns as my output targets. E, E. I'm not thinking, okay, put your tongue there, chew your jaw here. I'm not, I'm doing the output targets. It's more efficient for refining and for the ultimate ideal product, which is the feel, the sound, and the sound is, if you can put that in the feel bin, right? The feel, they're all sensory outputs. The sound output and the sensation output. E, A, and all of this I've learned. Oh yeah, A, 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 A. I've learned those sensations and I intend them along with the expression, and it plays the body very nicely.
Yeah. And the good news is teachers are probably already doing some of this. They might just not necessarily think of it as all of that acoustic terminology and all of the scientificness about it, if you
Right.
like. So adjustments to shapes is an acoustic strategy. So don't worry if this feels overwhelming, because it's one of those things you're probably already doing, I would assume, in our training.
Anyone teaching voice is already doing acoustic pedagogy. You are changing sounds. That's acoustic pedagogy. Knowing some of the details under the hood just gives you more information for your necessarily creative, subjective directives. How many of us in a lesson had the experience of, well, I've never said this before, but try this. But you know what you're going for, and you're not quite getting it. You're trying to stimulate a better accident to happen, a favorable accident. And when it happens, what did that feel like? What was that like to you? You have the conversation. Let's do it again. Do it again right away. Do it several times. What did that feel like? Because you're trying to get them to remember procedural knowledge, a sensation. You're trying to get them to remember a sensation and how they manage to trigger that sensation, that response. So, yeah.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Ken. As usual, it's been a pleasure. And by my watch, we should be meeting again in December then. If we're meeting every 6 or 7 months,
There you go.
book us in.
There you go. Well, there's always more to talk about.
Excellent, Ken. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Mine too.